Yo, what's up everybody? This is Junior Chicken here with the BattleBots 2022 tier list. The roster has recently been posted on BattleBots for the 2021 season, but it will be debuting in 2022 on January 6th. So that's why I'm calling it the 2022 season. And in preparation for all of that, I will be ranking all of the competitors based on how well I think they will do this season. Keep in mind, this is still a fairly subjective list, although I will be taking the history of a BattleBot into consideration. Most of my experience is from 2019 and 2020, so I will be rating a lot based on how well the bots do in more recent seasons. So with all that out of the way, let's look at the tiers we've got here. So starting bottom to top, we have tier F is just the really crappy bots. I really don't have many expectations for them. D list, there's not necessarily terrible bots, but they're still pretty bad. You know, they still have a lot to prove. C, we've got the okay bots. You know, they're alright. They aren't the best, but they aren't the worst either. This will also be the tier where I will be putting the new bots in the competition just to give them a clean slate. Then we get to rank B, and this is where we get to the pretty decent bots. These are the kind of bots that know how to go the distance and get a few knockouts every now and then. A tier is where we get to the more established bots in the competition. You see them, you hear their names, and you're like, oh yeah, that bot knows how to kick some ass. I definitely expect some of these to make it into the tournament. And then S, we have the best of the best. We have the highest hopes for them. They are poised to win the giant nut, and if they don't get a high ranking in the tournament, we will be pretty disappointed in them. So now on to the bots themselves. In alphabetical order, we start off with Big Dill. First and foremost, big up Emmanuel Carrillo, representing people with disabilities in BattleBots. I highly respect that. And onto the bot itself, it is a fork lifter bot with quite a long reach, actually. It's got some long, strong forks on it. I still would like to see some more from it, though. I know it did compete in a Bounty Hunters episode. So in the regular season, it only got one win in against Adam93, who isn't really a good bot. Yeah, I still feel like I need to see more of it. So I'll put Big Dill in C tier. You know, I think it's going to be a decent bot. I just hope that gets some more chances to show its worth. Next up, we got Black Dragon, which is a really impressive team back in 2020. 2019, it made it to the Desperado tournament and won, making it automatically in the season tournament. And unfortunately, it couldn't quite beat Lockjaw, so it lost in the first round. But 2020 was a really good year for Black Dragon. Didn't get a perfect season. They ended up losing one match to Copperhead, but they had a really great tournament run in 2020. They just knocked out Slammo. They actually beat Tombstone, made it to the quarterfinals with an insane match against Riot where they actually caught fire, but they still won because their drive motor and weapons motor were actually separated. Unfortunately, they couldn't quite beat Whiplash in the semifinals, but it was still a really impressive run for Black Dragon, and for that, I think they've earned their right in A tier. Next up, we got Blacksmith, which is probably the most fitting name for that bot because it is a hammer and a flamethrower combo. Blacksmith, I've only seen in 2019, and it didn't do the best per se, but it did beat its do or die match with Rotator to make it into the tournament. Very durable bot, and I definitely think it has some potential. So yeah, I'm going to put him in B tier because not the best bot per se, but I definitely see it doing well in this season. Next up is Blade, a new bot in the competition apparently. So yeah, C tier. But yeah, it looks to be a pretty strong Blade there. Horizontal spinners, pretty destructive, so yeah, nice to see. Now we got Blip. Blip looks like some sort of maybe flipper bot. Of course, a new bot in the competition, so it's going C tier. Wondering how it's going to be able to get its opponents up onto the flipper. Next up, we have Bloodsport, three-pronged horizontal spinner. Team leader Justin Marple did pretty well in 2019 and 2020. Couldn't quite make the tournament in 2019, and then 2020 it was seeded number 2 because it had an undefeated season that year, but that might have been a mistake because its tournament run was just painful. They almost lost to Gruff because a third of their weapon broke off, like one of the prongs completely broke off and rendered their weapon unusable, so they had to use control and aggression points to win. Thankfully, if Gruff's driving was better, they would have definitely lost, but thankfully that's what got them the win. And then they couldn't quite beat Tantrum after that. So it looks like they did participate in the bounty against Beta, but they couldn't quite win against Lockjaw. I still have yet to see that bounty hunt though, so I definitely feel like they deserve a B rank. Captain Shredderator. I think I already know this guy's going into F tier. Captain Shredderator is just not that good of a team, honestly. The problem is with these full body spinners is that they take the longest to get to full speed, so they're easy to box rush, and if they hit the edges or the corners of the arena, they become self-destructive, and just Captain Shredderator just hasn't been able to get itself together. It's not a good bot right now. Who knows, maybe they'll turn that around this season. Next up is Claw Viper, newcomers in the 2020 season apparently, and I haven't seen much of Claw Viper other than did compete in a bounty against Tombstone but lost to Kraken. And then the only win it's gotten this year is against Hijinks. Yeah, I think I'm just going to put this bot in D tier. Not that impressed by it. Next up we have Cobalt. I think I only saw them in the 2019 season, not 2020. They're like a Saw bot apparently. Its record doesn't look too bad. I haven't seen too much of it. I did see it make it to a do or die fight against Minotaur, but it didn't win. I'm going to give it a little credit and put it into C tier. Next up we have Copperhead, another high ranking seed in the tournament that didn't quite live up to expectations, although it looks like Zach Goff is not leading the team anymore. It's different team leaders. Looks like it's a couple, Robert and Kimberly Cohen, but not to undermine the bot, it's still a great drum vertical spinner. Didn't have the best 2019 season, but 2020 it definitely came on top with an undefeated season, including decapitating Gigabyte. Then it made it into the tournament and lost to Mammoth because its weapon cut out for half of the fight. Once it made it into the bounty against Son of Waiachi, it couldn't win against Gigabyte again. Gigabyte actually won a rematch against it. But yeah, it's still a pretty great bot, so I'm going to put it in the B tier. We got another newcomer here with Deadlift, so my main question is it a crusher or a lifter? Oh, so this bot is a grappler. Pretty interesting design for a bot. I like it. It is a newcomer, so I do put it in C tier, to be fair. Now we got Deep 6. This was a really interesting bot I found in 2019. It is basically the longest vertical spinner bar that you will see on a BattleBot. And unfortunately, that means it doesn't have the best stability because you have all that force going on. It can be hard to maneuver and control it, but I definitely still want to see some more from this bot because it only showed up in the 2019 season, but its only wins are against two bots that aren't that good, that being Axe Backwards and Nelly the Ellie bot. Definitely need to see more of it before I can put it in a higher tier, so C it is. Got another newcomer here with Defender, but it looks like it's being built by the Vasquez family. So we might see some really good performance out of this bot, considering that the Vasquez family is a very prominent bot building family in BattleBots. Although, is the guy on the left here going to be the team leader and like the Vasquez family is the mentors? I'm wondering. Oh, Jason Vasquez. So this is probably this is Maddie's brother who's going to be running this bot. And Defender, it looks like a grappler. It's going to be nice to see this in competition. C tier, but I'm definitely expecting a lot from this bot if it is a Vasquez family bot. Double Jeopardy. Okay, I haven't even really heard of this bot. It's got a cannon on the end. It's a shooter bot. And Yeah, not a single win. You're going F tier. Dragon Slayer. Is this a new bot? Yeah, it's another rookie bot. A bar spinner. Let me see this. Oh, okay. So it's a bit curved. You can see from the front. But yeah, that's a pretty thick bar spinner. I like the scales on it. It looks cool. And yeah, it would be interesting to see this one. Duck. Now, Duck, I don't think is that impressive of a bot. It is a highly durable bot, but you need more than durability to really make it in a competition. And as I've seen in 2019 against the tougher bots, it doesn't really have much going for it. It does look like they've swapped the lifting arm for a flipper, which might do them a bit better, but I'm going to put it in D tier because I still don't expect much from it. Moving on to the winners of the 2020 season, we've got Endgame, and the question is, do I expect these guys to make it into the next tournament on a high seed? And to that I say, of course I do. S tier right off the bat. Yeah, Endgame really was dialed in. They'd had a pretty good season in 2019, but then 2020 came along and they went all in. They dialed in. They shocked the world by knocking out Tombstone in record time. And while they couldn't beat Bloodsport, they knocked out Hypershock again in similar fashion. Then they made it into the tournament in the 6th seed. And from there, they just plowed their way to the Giant Nut. And yeah, one of the toughest bots to beat in this competition right now. And they're looking like special secret agents in that. So can't wait to see them smash this year as well. Next up is Free Shipping, the forklift bot run by Gary Jin, and a respectable bot, but I've always found it to be a showmanship bot as opposed to a competitive one, and especially when you hear the announcers talk about it. They talk about how Gary Jin always has fun at these events. He's very sportsmanlike, has a lot of showmanship. Not to say that it's a bad bot per se. It did get 2 wins in the 2019 season, one against Bronco and one against Railgun Max, so it has that going for it. But in terms of competition, it's not really the most competitive bot. It's more of a it's a good bot, but not great, and I'm just gonna put it in the C tier because of that. Fusion. I'm not necessarily a big fan of this bot. I think Reese Urt still kind of needs to dial things in because it's got decent win in against weaker bots, but when it comes to the tougher ones, it still struggles per se. It's pretty difficult to have 2 different kinds of spinners on your bot and then having it function. I think it's just gonna have to go in the C tier for now because it did do decent last season. I just feel like it still ran into some technical issues. Ghost Raptor. I haven't really seen much from this bot in 2020 other than it got knocked out by Jackbox. Didn't have the best season. Yeah, it's only won against Chomp and Deadlift. And the 2015 season's not here, though. So maybe I'll just put it in the D tier list for now. If it did well in the past, but isn't doing so well now. Next up is Gigabyte. And Gigabyte had a pretty impressive 2020 season, I would say. Not so much in the regular season, but later on. It definitely proved itself. I think in the Son of Waiachi bounty, I saw the full episodes and it actually beat Copperhead and it made it to win the battle against Son of Waiachi and really dialed itself up. I know I'm not a big fan of full body spinners, but John Mladenic has really done his best to make this the best bot it can be, and it's really starting to show. So definitely want to put him in A tier. Glitch. This looks to be an interesting one because it's a drum spinner, but it's got an angled ramp. That's an interesting way to get the high ground, is coming at it like with the corner. Prop them up at a 45-degree angle and then hit the undercarriage and see what happens. This definitely could be a very interesting bot in the competition. Next up is Gruff, and I kind of like this bot. It is a forklift with a very durable design and a built-in flamethrower, but didn't have the best 2019 season. Oh, but oh wait, it looks like it made it to the end of the bounty against Tombstone, but couldn't quite win. Because I know it faced Tombstone in 2019, and it looks like this bounty it went up against, which it made all the way to the end, but couldn't quite stop history from repeating itself. Also, the 2020 matches it had, like, it beat Hypershock, which is good, and did struggle against Whiplash, but did the best it could. But then its fight against Extinguisher, that was painful to watch. It basically got stuck in Extinguisher, couldn't like flip it over, and ended up wearing its motor and lost. If it had better driving against Bloodsport in its first round of the tournament, it definitely would have won. But if it did make it all the way to the end of a bounty, I feel like it definitely deserves some props for that. You know what? I'm going to put him in B tier. Next up is Hijinks. Debuted in 2020. I didn't see much from it. Looks like it competed again in the bounty against Beta, but couldn't quite make it to the end. It looks like it's an okay bot. It's got the long horizontal spinner to it, and it has had decent wins against not the strongest bots, but I feel like maybe I should see some more from it, so I'm going to put it at C. Next up, we got Huge, and Huge is a pretty good bot, I would say. Had a pretty decent 2019 season, made it into the tournament with its do or die match against Hypershock, but then ended up losing to Whiplash. 2020 was a pretty rough season for Huge. They got the loss against Mammoth, and then they got bullied by Hydra because Hydra just installed this apparatus on it to keep Huge from getting to it, because fortunately their bar can't be longer than the wheels they have. And yeah, after that fight, even with the mask on, you could see Jonathan Schultz was just pissed. Thankfully, he did get a win in against Kraken, which got him into the tournament, but then history repeated itself when it lost to Whiplash. I still think Huge is a pretty good bot. I'm going to put it at B. It just had a rough season last year, and it should be better this year. Of course, next up, we got Hydra, probably the most feared bot in the entire competition right now. Hydra is basically one of the best flipper bots ever made, and we've seen it in action. It got an undefeated season in 2019, made it into the tournament, but then lost in the first round to Minotaur. Came back 2020, faced tougher competition, got an undefeated season, and made it to the quarterfinals, only to lose out to Whiplash. But still, Hydra is definitely one of the most feared bots in the competition right now, and because it's had a pretty damn near flawless record, I want to put it in S tier. It's definitely a bot that deserves it. I think the main way you beat Hydra is basically you have to out-drive Jake Ewart, because you look at the two drivers that have beaten Hydra. Matty Vasquez and Daniel Freitas, two of the best drivers in the sport. You just got to have that driving power to outmaneuver and outsmart Jake Ewart. We got Hypershock coming back, and I think Hypershock is kind of an underrated bot. I feel like it was seeded way too low in the 2020 tournament. Of course, that means it ended up losing to Hydra. Didn't have the best season in 2020, though. It only beat Mammoth. It got thrown out of the arena by Endgame, which isn't too big of a surprise because Endgame was on fire that year. And unfortunately, they couldn't beat Gruff. But they had a pretty good 2019. Was probably the toughest bot that Byte Force had to go up against. And also, Will Bales is a really good driver. And that adds up to a lot. He just couldn't quite beat Jake Ewart. I feel like it deserves a bit more credit. So I'm going to put it in B tier. Next up is Ice Wave. Now, I think there was a bounty for Ice Wave in 2020. Yeah, it doesn't have the best record per se, but I'm not seeing anything regarding what happened to it in its bounty. You know what? I'll put him at C. Give him a fair chance considering I didn't see it in 2019 or 2020. Next up is Jackpot. Now, this was probably my favorite newcomer from 2020. I actually think it got robbed from the Best Newcomers Award because Rusty, yeah, it had charm to it, but it wasn't a very good bot, whereas Jackpot was coming in and knocking robots out ridiculously at his first run. This is a bot built on a budget. Only 1,000 US put into this bot, and it was knocking out bots that were worth more than that. Taking out Ghost Raptor, Sub-Zero, and Lockjaw. Okay, so it didn't quite do very well in the bounty against Tombstone, but yeah, I still think this bot is pretty awesome. So, B tier, which is pretty high for a newcomer, but if you're a 4K bot knocking out the competition, I'd say you deserve it. Next up is Pardon My French. I don't think I've heard of this bot before. Yeah, it's a new bot, but it looks to be a pretty heavy shredding vertical spinner here. But yeah, that looks like an ominous drum spinner, so I feel like it definitely could see some destructive potential out of this. Another newcomer here with Jaeger. So Jaeger, it looks to be something like Gemini in that it's two bots, but this time it has different weapon configurations. You got one attack axe bot right here, and then a horizontal spinner. A pretty interesting combination for two bots, and I'd like to see how it works. Next up is Kraken, who I am not very impressed with. It's supposed to be a grappler bot with a flamethrower, and it hasn't really made a big impression with me. Even with its win against Witch Doctor in the regular season, it just seemed like it was mainly just Witch Doctor struggling with its weapon problems. It did look like it competed against two bounties, though. Both Son of Waiachi, where unfortunately it lost out in the first round, and then couldn't quite beat Gruff when it made it into the finals for that bounty. I still feel like it has more to prove, so C tier. Next up is Donald Hudson and Lockjaw. Donald Hudson, of course, is a veteran bot builder, fairly well established in the BattleBots community. And Lockjaw is a pretty decent bot. It's got thick disc spinner to cause damage. One of the more competent bots in the competition. Won the Desperado tournament in 2018, then in 2019 made it into the tournament and beat that year's Desperado winner, which was Black Dragon. Fortunately, couldn't quite beat Bite Force, but what can you do? It's Bite Force. One of the best bots ever made, which unfortunately isn't in this year, but I digress. Oh, and it looks like it won the bounty against Beta in 2020, so that's a pretty impressive win, even though that was a redesign of Beta. Unfortunately, couldn't get past the first round in the tournament because it lost to Shatter, but it's still a pretty competent bot, and with respects to Donald Hudson, I'm going to put it in A tier. Next up is Lucky. This bot is Canadian, which is nice. Appears to be a flipper bot. Yeah, a flipper bot, but I haven't really seen much of it. I think it only showed up in 2019 from where I saw it, and yeah, it doesn't do well against the tougher bots out there, and unfortunately I think I'm just going to put it at D. Next up is Mad Catter. They had a really good season in 2020, I will say. Undefeated, but then they go into the tournament, and they had a chance to beat Tombstone, but decided to get too fancy trying to go for the wheels rather than jamming up the weapon, and I think that's what cost them. Martin Mason has been a pretty good mentor to his team and continue to make a good bot, and it looks like, is that a flipper on the end of that? It looks like it's got a flipper and a vertical spinner. I could be completely wrong with that. Oh, it competed in 2019 too. I guess I didn't see much of it. Oh yeah, because it didn't have much strong competition to go up against. But yeah, they definitely dialed in 2020, so I'm going to put them at B. Next up is Malice, a 2020 newcomer who did pretty well. It had a pretty good 2020 season. It was able to beat its rival Shatter, but then went up in a match against Mad Catter and lost because it got flipped onto its back. And then the same thing happened in its match against Sub-Zero in the Witch Doctor bounty, which I feel bad because it was doing so well against Sub-Zero, and then one lucky shot, it's basically on its back. And that's the one weakness of Malice, is once it's on its back, it's like a turtle. You can't flip it over. The wheel does not have enough momentum to flip it over. If they can correct that flaw, they would be doing a lot better now. And of course, while it did make it into the tournament, it couldn't quite match the power of Gigabyte and end up losing because of that. But still a pretty solid team. So say B tier. Now we have Mammoth, one of the bigger bots in the competition. Debuted in 2019 with an okay record, I would say, and got a bit better when it entered in 2020. Got a good knockout against Huge, and actually beat Copperhead in the tournament, which is a big surprise. And unfortunately, in the bounty against Tombstone, it lost to Smee. I still feel like it has some potential, but still a lot to prove as well. So, going in the C tier. Now we have Minotaur, driven by Daniel Freitas, one of the most destructive drum spinners in the competition. And they weren't there in 2020, but in 2019 they were, and it was a pretty tough start for these guys. They had weapon issues right off the bat, and that really dampened the first half of their season. But then they entered the Desperado tournament and started to prove themselves. They started to show some improvement, that they were actually pretty powerful, even though they end up being runner-ups to Black Dragon that year. But it was pretty exciting because both Black Dragon and Minotaur are Brazilian teams, so that was quite a nice turnout for the Desperado tournament. And they continued to prove themselves, got into the tournament, and even beat Hydra, which is a big deal because Hydra's probably the most feared bot in the competition. But unfortunately, they couldn't quite win against Death Roll, who was on fire that year, so it's understandable. But yeah, I definitely feel like Minotaur is still a very competent and dangerous threat in the competition, and it's going in the A tier. Now we got Overhaul. They look like newcomers in the competition. Another grappler bot. Okay, so I haven't seen these guys. Doesn't look like they have the best records though. Definitely a bot that could use some improvement. Maybe 2021 will be their big year, but for now, I kind of have to go with my gut. Put them in the D tier for now, since they haven't had the best records in the past, and it's taken them a long time to come back. So next up is P1, and I definitely think these guys are going in the D tier because I only think they won once last year to Smee. It did look like they got some good wins in 2020. One against Tracer, one against Kronos. Yeah, I'll keep them in D tier though. Pain Train, they're definitely F tier. I think I've only seen them win once against Smee, and even then I feel like they should have lost because their whole drum just fell out like right near the end of the match, and that's not good. Except we got Perfect Phoenix, the boy wonder, mentored by Ray Billings, the Kinetic King himself, the man behind Tombstone. And for here, Tyler Wynn was able to build Perfect Phoenix. Pretty interesting horizontal spinner. I still feel like I need to see more from this little guy though. Funny thing, the two bots he lost against, aside from the bounty against Big Deal, was Scorpios and Endgame. Two bots that actually beat Tombstone. So it's kind of funny, but I still need to see more from it to be convinced. So C tier. Next up is Rampage. Looks to be a new bot. Oh, it's only been in... It looks like it competed in a bounty. Looks like it's a fairly new bot, but it lost 2 matches in the 2020 season. One unaired match against Black Widow, and then one against Fusion in the beta Bounty Hunters episode. It's already competing and hasn't been doing well. I'm gonna have to put it in F tier. Retrograde. Looks like it's a undercutter and lifter. So that... Oh, it looks like it has similar forks related to Big Dill. But where's the undercutter? Of course, it's a new bot, so I'm gonna put it in the C tier. Maybe it'll be nice to see a match of Big Dill versus Retrograde, see what that's like. Got Ribot. Dudes from WPI coming in with a bot with multiple weapon configurations. It could be a vertical, horizontal spinner, whatever they want. Different modules for different situations. And they've shown themselves to be a pretty competent team. They had a pretty decent season in 2019. And then 2020, they had another decent season, made it into the tournament, and they beat Beta, which wasn't too big of a surprise. But then they actually won their rematch against Uppercut, because the two robots got in a pushing match, and then Uppercut had its drive motors basically wear out. And then, of course, they couldn't really stand a match against Black Dragon. So yeah, I think these guys at least deserve a B. Riptide. This seems to be a new competitor with a really big egg beater drum. So put them in the C tier where they belong. Now we're on to my favorite bot in the competition, Rotator! One of the coolest bots out there with its golden design, attack and defend stances, configurations for 2 blades, and Victor Soto is a bot building mad scientist. It hasn't had necessarily the best seasons, but I still feel like it's really powerful bot. Was the most destructive bot in 2018. And that earned it a fight against Tombstone in 2019, where it really proved itself by beating Tombstone, pulling one of the biggest upsets in the 2019 season. Unfortunately, it couldn't quite win its do or die fight against Blacksmith in order to make it into the tournament. But then in 2020, it had a bit of a rough season because it got completely robbed in its first fight against Beta. Because not only did Beta not fire their weapon once, but their weapon head broke off because of Rotator. And somehow Rotator still lost. Yeah, I feel like that loss was pretty undeserved. It was a pretty controversial fight as is. At least in its fight against Valkyrie, it did prove itself to be pretty durable. It put on a really good fight, tough fight against Valkyrie, even though it lost. And then ended up winning against Big Deal, made it into the tournament, and then beat Jackpot, but of course end up against Endgame. But then it got into the bounty against Bronco, where it actually won the whole thing. So that's a pretty big deal on its own as well. I haven't seen that bounty yet, but if someone could give me a link to that or tell me how I can watch it, I'd really appreciate it, because I really want to see how Rotator won this one. This record isn't going to tell me everything. It looks like the bots it beat in order to get there were Axolotl, Captain Shredder, and Mad Catter. The first 2 not that impressive, but the third one, yeah, Mad Catter's pretty tough. So even though Bronco had a pretty crap 2019 season, I feel like it was worthy of bounty. And if Rotator won that, that's a pretty big deal. So don't want to be too biased. As much as I love Rotator, I just don't see it necessarily winning the whole thing. As much as I love to see that. So A tier. Wait. Rusty came back in 2021? I swear, I thought Rusty retired after losing to Copperhead in the Sonoiachi bounty. But it looks like it's a revamped design, more like a Rusty 2.0. You still got the dome head and the light eyes and the Rusty exterior with the track wheels, and looks like it has a different kind of stinger on it too. I really hope David Eaton really revamped this one. But yeah, considering the record that it has right now, I think I still have to put it in D tier. I don't know why it won Best Newcomer in 2020. I mean, it is a charming robot, but it was not nearly as impressive as like Malice or Jackpot. So put him in the D tier. Hopefully he'll have a better season in 2021 with this revamped design, but who knows. Next up is Sawblaze, a very impressive bot run by Jameson Go, a very competent bot builder and driver. The attack saw and flamethrower combination is very cool. Had a really good regular season in 2019, only losing to Tombstone. Then makes it into the quarterfinals of the tournament, only to lose to Witch Doctor. But then 2020, he had a pretty solid season as well, only losing once to Uppercut, which was more of like a student versus teacher kind of fight, because Jameson Go mentored Alex Toro, and you could tell Jameson was pretty proud when he lost to Uppercut, because one of his pupils actually surpassed him. Then makes it into the tournament, where he actually wins against Witch Doctor this time, but somehow ends up losing to Tantrum in the quarterfinals. Just can't quite get past the quarterfinals, but Jameson definitely still got a great bot here with Sawblaze, and definitely worth an A tier. Now we got Shatter, pretty decent bot. Adam Wrigley's, a very passionate and supportive team leader. He had a pretty good 2019 season, and 2020 season was also pretty solid. He was actually able to make it to the quarterfinals of the tournament, only to lose out to Endgame. But yeah, I think Shatter definitely deserves to be in the B tier at least. Now we got Scorpios, another bot I think that is worthy of the A tier. Run by Zachary Little, and pretty decent 2019 season, and in 2020, Scorpios finally fulfilled its destiny by knocking out Tombstone. So that was a pretty big deal. Got 10th seed in the tournament, but unfortunately lost out to Witch Doctor. But still, very competent bot. Zachary Little has been at this game for quite a long time as well, so A tier it is. Now we got Slammo. I haven't really been too impressed with Slammo because it's supposed to be like a suplex bot. It grabs the bot and then flips its arms to the other side. I'm not sure even why it made it into the tournament at the seed it did. Oh, it was a newcomer in 2020, and it looks like it was able to beat the weaker bots in the competition, but when it came to the stronger bots, that's why it crumbled in the tournament, because Black Dragon is really good bot. So, fortunately, I'm going to have to put him in the D tier. Smee. This bot is just a really weird one. It's supposed to like wrap around other bots and then cut at them with the underside horizontal spinners. Looks like it has gotten a few wins in, but still just an underwhelming bot to me. So I'll give him the D tier at least, because he did definitely deserve to win that fight against Pain Train. Sub-Zero. Yeah, Sub-Zero. This is a weird one for me. Not the biggest fan of this particular flipper bot. He's been in the competition for years and struggled to find success. I mean, it did okay in the 2020 season, I would say. It looks like it's got some wins against some weaker bots. And it did do decent in the Witch Doctor bounty. It was able to make it all the way to the end, even though that last win against Mouse was a fairly lucky one, because it was basically almost knocked out at the point it was at, but then it got a lucky hit. And then it just got completely destroyed by Witch Doctor, because Witch Doctor is that good. Yeah, I guess I'll put it in the C tier. It's not bad per se, but just definitely needs some improvement. Switchback. This is a new bot. Looks like it has this swinging arm with a bunch of disc spinners on it. So it's going to be interesting to see how that functions. So I guess it's supposed to like swing back and forth so you can hit bots at different angles with the spinners and cause damage. Put it at C tier, but it's definitely an interesting bot to check out in a competition. Next up is Tantrum, who I think is kinda underrated, to be completely honest. The announcers were constantly calling Tantrum the most improved bot of 2020, and I don't know if that's 100% true. I think Valkyrie might be more suited for that, or Endgame because it won, but its first win against Valkyrie was a bit lucky because it did have its batteries basically wear out, and that's why they had to downsize the fists that were on it, so they had room for more battery power. They won against a few easier bots, so they got a fairly low seed, but then they made it into the tournament and actually did pretty well. They beat Fusion, which isn't too surprising, but then they beat Mammoth, and then Sawblaze. That was a pretty big win. But then, of course, once they reached the semifinals, they were no match for Endgame. Yeah, I definitely think these guys are at least worth the B tier. Yeah, I'll put them at B tier. That sounds about right. Ooh, now we have Tombstone. Ray Billings, the Kinetic King himself. And at risk of being controversial, I think that Tombstone is starting to lose some of its luster. It's not as feared as it used to be, because people are starting to catch on how to beat it. Basically, you gotta go up against that weapon, jam it, stop it from working, and then basically it's got nothing else really going for it, because it doesn't have anything to push you with, so you can bully it around the battle box once your weapon's out, if you have forks or wedgelets or something to get under it. It had a great 2019 season, to be fair, like nearly undefeated if Rotator hadn't come in with the Rocky Story victory. Unfortunately, 2020 didn't do so good, because the only regular season win it got was against a rookie bot Yeah, Scorpios beat it, Endgame completely humiliated it, and while Tombstone still made it into the tournament, it only got a win in against Mad Catter, because Mad Catter could have won, they just decided to play too fancy, and then they went up against Black Dragon, who meant business, and ended up losing. But with respect for Ray Billings, he does have a giant nut under his belt. I'm going to put him at the A tier. Not S, because I don't think he's going to be winning the tournament. A lot more bots are understanding how to beat Tombstone. Still can't sleep on it entirely, because it has known to have pedigree in the past. Next up, we got Uppercut, the team from MIT, run by Alex Hatoro. Quite a powerful vertical spinner. They had a pretty solid 2019 season. Just barely made it into the tournament, but ended up losing in the first round to Bite Force, which I guess it wasn't really a fair matchup considering Bite Force is like the best robot in the competition. Then they had a great season in 2020, knocked out Gemini in record time, and even though they lost to Hydra, they didn't get knocked out. They kept going even with their weapon. Got in the 4th seed in the tournament, knocking out Hijinks as expected, and then unfortunately they couldn't quite win their rematch against Ribot. They just kept shoving and ended up wearing out their drive battery, but you know, still a pretty great team, and honestly I think they're worth an A tier. They're that good. I definitely see Uppercut going pretty far in 2021. Next up is Valkyrie, led by Leanne Cushing, one of the more interesting horizontal spinners out there since it has multiple disc configurations. It's actually shown quite a bit of improvement in 2020. I know 2019 wasn't its best year. Had some pretty solid wins in, but couldn't quite beat Quantum in its do or die match. Then 2020 comes around and it actually does pretty good. Granted, their win against Tantrum was kind of lucky because their weapon was out, but then all of a sudden Tantrum lost its battery power, but then it went up against Rotator, and that was a great spectacle. You really got to see Valkyrie at its best, staying in there and eventually winning against Rotator. And unfortunately, while it couldn't beat Whiplash, it did make it into the tournament where it took out Sub-Zero, but then was paired up against Whiplash again where it lost. And it did go into the bounty against Witch Doctor, but unfortunately couldn't win again against Sub-Zero. But yeah, I still see a pretty solid bot here. Definitely worth a B tier, although I wish I could rate it higher. Now, with Valkyrie winning the most destructive bot in 2020, the question is, will Ray Billings want a matchup against Valkyrie and Tombstone? So that would be a fight I would love to see. You know, we'll have to see if Valkyrie can jam up that blade and hopefully have some pushing power of its own so it can beat Tombstone. But yeah, you know, with Tombstone having that really strong bar spinner going up against a very strong disc spinner, we'll have to see how that works out, and definitely hope that's coming up this season. Next up, we have Whiplash. Runner-ups of 2020, Vasquez family, a very highly respected and highly prominent bot family in the BattleBots community. Had a strong 2019 season where it ended up losing in the quarterfinals to Tombstone in the 2019 tournament, but then came back in the 2020 season. Things looked a bit bleak when they lost to Sawblaze, but they continued proving themselves to be strong, made it to the finals, and unfortunately they lost against Endgame, and that's why they were runner-ups, but still a very great bot. And Matty Vasquez, one of the best drivers out there, had a conductor since he was little, and he's probably one of the best drivers in the sport. I definitely see the Vasquez family going far with Whiplash again, so let's put them in the S tier. I feel like they definitely deserve it. Next up, we have Witch Doctor, the runner-ups from the 2019 season. I still really like Witch Doctor, probably my second favorite bot in the competition. Andrea and Mike Galletti are the power couple of BattleBots. 2019 season, they were dialed in. They came in with an undefeated season, made it all the way to the finals, even against a grueling fight against Death Row. They were so close to losing that fight. That was like one of the tightest fights I've ever seen, was their fight against death roll, and they came out victorious. Fortunately, couldn't beat Bite Force, of course, but we still love them, and they came in 2020. Unfortunately, they also had a pretty rough start. Started having weapon problems against Hydra and Kraken, and that costed them both the fights, but they proved themselves against Slammo. They made it to the tournament and beat Scorpios, but unfortunately couldn't quite beat Sawblaze again. Sawblaze was dialed in on that fight. Didn't want to repeat history. And they did have their own bounty, which they did win. So that's a big deal, and I feel like they definitely could pull off another run to the top to get that giant nut. So let's put them in the S tier. And finally, we've got Yeti. Very destructive drum spinner, kind of like Minotaur, but much beefier. It looks like it put on the prongs again, so it can get under bots, get the low ground. So far, I've only seen this bot in 2019, but it proved itself very strongly. Made it into the tournament with his do or die fight against Duck, but unfortunately could not match up to the power of Death Roll and ended up losing to that. But yeah, definitely a competent threat from Yeti. It's been in the scene for years, and for that, I'll give it the A tier. So here is my tier list for the season. Now, of course, I cannot predict what's going to happen next, but I'm hoping this will be a pretty awesome season of BattleBots. We got some interesting newcomers and a lot of returning favorites. Unfortunately, there are some bots that I would like to come back that aren't here, like Bite Force and Death Roll. But yeah, definitely looking forward to this season of BattleBots. Hopefully some of my favorites like Witch Doctor and Rotator will do awesome. And who knows, maybe the ones in the lower tiers will start to prove themselves this season. You never know. But just a reminder that this is still fairly subjective, my opinion, based on what I've seen from these bots. And if you have your own tier list, feel free to click the links below to see the templates I used. And from there, you can make your own tier list. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.